Tere, hey. My name is Allpere. May sound Estonian, I don't speak. My father never taught me. I'm an interaction designer with industrial design background. And I got my master degree in Umeå Institute of Design in 1999. So we were the first ones out. And since then I worked as you said here, with mobile phones at Nokia. I've done some medical equipment and other professional tools like thermal cameras. Before 7 years of being a UX manager at Electrolux in Sweden, where I managed a team of UX designers who designed the appliances, the user interfaces of the appliances there. And now, just 2 months ago, less than 2 months ago, I started to work at Telia Sonera in the digital domain, and that's EMT for you. So my talk today is about what I've learned in the hardware UI world that I'm bringing forward to the digital domain. And I don't know how many times I've been asked to set the clock on the oven right at friends' homes during all these 7 years at Electrolux. You know, the clock that shines so bright at night that has the wrong time at least half the year, and it's so difficult to figure out how to set the clock on. But I don't think anybody ever mentioned all the milk that's not overboiling in their homes, thanks to the fact that you only have to press once on the hob. Thanks to the fact that you don't have to first set the zone and then lower the temperature, like you have to do on very many hobs out there. Have a look. There are good examples, and there are not so good examples of hardware UI design. And I've done some good things and some not so good things. But I've learned a lot throughout my years, and I'd like to share some of that with you. But as I said, I'd like to extend my talk into being about what I can bring into the digital world. Because when I started to work at Telia Sonera, I thought to myself, is there anything I can learn, I can take from when I designed these seemingly simple user interfaces with pixels large as Lego blocks and LEDs and segments that can only turn on and off, into the seemingly more sophisticated world of the digital domain with apps, webs, and desktop applications? And I do think that there is. Because even though the sandbox size is different, and also the material in the sandbox is different between the two areas, there's a lot that's the same. There's a lot that's the same when it comes to thinking about the process and the attitude. So I've gathered 5 pieces of advice for myself, and I'd like to share that with you a little bit later on. But first, I'd like to put us a little bit more on the same page about the sandbox of hardware UI design. What's that? And I'm doing this to all of you out there who might design something in a hardware UI at some point, or for anybody in here who wants to have a new, fresh eyes when you go into the appliance store and look at all the products there. So, what is it then? Yeah, there are computers nowadays all over us, all over and around us, in the cars, in the home, worn as watches. And my kind of common view on them is that they have no well-known operating system that you can build your design on. There is no Windows 8, there is no iOS, etc., etc. So you cannot use the paradigms from there. You can't use the UI patterns and build your design on top of that. You have to invent it all yourself, which is fun, but it's also kind of hard. And I'll talk a little bit about the specifics of that soon. But to make sense of the different types, I've created a UI hardware ladder, and going from bottom to up, starting first with the display ladder, there's the LEDs, there's the segment LCD display, there's a monochromatic display, and there's a low-level color display. And then is the high-level displays that you're looking at now in your labs. So from the bottom and up, we have the LEDs. Their main attribute is that they light and they have a color. In the appliance industry, it's well known that most users tend to buy all of their appliances at the same time when they create the new kitchen. And then they want the appliances to look the same, because looks matter, and feel the same in the best case. And one important tool for making them look and feel the same is that they all have exactly the same LED color. So they actually, not only the same color, but exactly the same hue of each of the colors. Each main manufacturer has chosen a color, and they go with it. Miele is yellow, Bosch is orangey, Siemens is blue and white, AEG, that we designed, is red, and Electrolux is white. So go and have a look now in the stores and you'll recognize that. There's going to be some deviations, but that's the main rule of things. What's interesting about them is that they have different costs. The yellow costs and the red costs about a fifth of the white and the blue one. So that's kind of 20%. That's a lot when you have a lot of LEDs. Here is an image of the AEG kitchen that we launched in 2010. And they're all red LEDs here, and that's good news. But the white LEDs that Electrolux has is actually 5 times as expensive, and I'll show them later on. What I wanted to talk about here is that I can't even begin to tell you how troublesome, how much work it was to get the same red color out of these ones, because they're not designed by the same engineers, they're not purchased from the same place at the same time, so it all differs. So we had to work a lot to get the same color. Then, not so long time ago, in this domain, the multicolor LED came, and that's even more expensive than the white LED, and it's quite expensive. But it's a designer's dream, because here you can choose any hue out of the spectrum, like you see below here with a Nike fuel band, and you can change the color at any time. So it gives you huge amounts of freedom as a designer, and you can make more engaging feelings, experiences like waking up patterns and anything. But you can also use it for more practical domain, like you see on the left-hand side, or whatever, right-hand side for you, which is projection on the floor. This is a dishwasher that doesn't have a panel, so there's no buttons on the front, just on top. And knowing the time is important in a dishwasher, so there's a projection on the floor to see the time to end of the wash. But it doesn't show, if you put any color there, it doesn't show on any floor you have. You can have different kinds of floors. So we put in a multicolor LED as a backlit projection, and when you install it, you can choose from different ones so that you can actually see it on the floor. LEDs, how they're used now then. They're often put behind a piece of plastic, a piece of opening in the panel. And the challenge here is to make sure that the icon next to the LED that's representing the LED, or the LED is representing the icon, that you can actually see that they belong together. Here is, I don't think it's a very good example, so I put it there. And even nicer is, of course, when you can backlit a symbol instead. So you put the LED behind the symbol you want to show, but you need a piece of plastic in between, and that's kind of difficult engineering work to make that piece of plastic nice. So using those backlit symbols, you can have them with nice effects. And we worked a lot hard at Electrolux to kind of half it and turn them on and off slowly and kind of beautifully, learning and being inspired by the Apple battery opening LED here. So that's something we worked a lot with. Now, the LEDs, they can also be used for small displays. And you'll look around again at the 7-segment displays here. If you put 7 of these little LEDs behind segments like the 8 on the side here, you can create all the numbers. And we worked hard to figure out, to make sure that all of the LEDs, that all of our 7-segment displays had the same font. So we draw that font and put that in everywhere. And this is not something any user will recognize, that they're all the same everywhere. But the brand will get a more coherent feeling and a little bit more credible feeling if they don't look all different. Now, on to more real displays. The custom LCD segment display. Here you can draw the icons in a vector program. You can do it very precisely and as you would like to do, which opens up a lot of possibilities. And then it's etched into a tool, which takes, long time to make a tool. And on my side here, you see all of the icons in this display. And on the other side, you see how it looks like in the normal setting, a normal day. So only a few are lit. The point here is that you can only light them on and off. There's no gradual in between here. So you really have to work with that. But on the other hand, you can work with animations, and you can make things like these little staples. They can kind of run up and down to show activity and so. Or work with the more simple animations like blinking when there's an alarm or something. And as always, you have to make sure that you use blinking very sparingly, because it really is a powerful tool to attract attention. And you don't want your fridge to feel like a gambling banner on the web. It's easy. Now let's go to the more complex displays. They're also LCD displays, and they're called dot matrix displays. Here you have the little segments that are put in a grid, which makes it so that you can have text and language. And when you have text and language, you can suddenly have menu system and learnability, and you can talk to the user in a totally different way. And I propose that one should never have a menu system or a modal interaction if you don't have text, because that usability just sucks. Now, you can, they're usually one color, black and white, and then you have different color that backlights it, so you get this kind of color that you want to have. Here I put in a polar example that I haven't designed, of course, that has a combination of both segments and the dot matrix, and that's quite a nice way you can do it. So my final example about the displays is about low-level color displays, and I believe this is something you might reach and actually work with in a kiosk or whatever. Here you have not only a low-level color display, but you have a low-level processor behind it that makes a huge impact on how it actually looks. These guys typically have 256, think about how few that is, or 16 bits of color. That means that you have to design either in blocks of color, or to design each pixel, look at each pixel individually, so that you avoid kind of a banding effect. I think we have a little bit of banding on the kind of grayscale there. A banding effect that can come if you have so few colors. So you really have to work with your material and be very meticulous here. But the other thing about low-level color displays and their processors is that normally there's no transparency. So you can't have all of your nice cutouts and things animating on the screens. Each of your graphics needs to be cut out in the square. So you have to have the same background everywhere. And you need to kind of cut it in together with the background. So I made these green squares just to illustrate that. And that non-transparency also means that you cannot have anti-alias text like we're used to. So the text looks jagged. It's not a mistake that it looks like this on the other side here. It looks jagged. And that's something that's very difficult to deal with. I'll give you an example how we worked on that later on. So that was the displays. And now to the input, because you need some input as well. So there's rotaries, push, buttons, touch keys, simple touchscreens, like old touchscreens, and then the analog multi-touchscreens that you're now fiddling with, some of you. So the rotaries, there's two types. There's this fixed position on that dishwasher over there, where you have to have a pointer that points at the graphics on the panel, and then a clunky feeling, chung, 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 to change the program. And it's difficult to get these guys feeling premium. A more premium type of rotary is the encoder, which is on the left-hand side, where you turn either to change the volume, you know that from your stereo, or to change something on the screen, or like here on a row of LEDs. And they can feel very premium and nice, and you can really work with how they feel. Then there's push buttons, and again, the feeling of these really matters for the experience and for how you like it. They can be kind of mushy or really distinct or hard or light to push. And that's also quite a large engineering work that you have to do together as a designer and an engineer. You avoid this work when you do the touch buttons. Then you have a very smooth surface, and it's easier to clean, so we like it in the appliance industry. But if you don't have touch, like on your phone, where you get the feedback directly looking at it, you need to have a sound feedback on a touch button when it's kind of outside of the screen, like my buttons here. So that needs to be designed. Now, that was a bit about the UI hardware sandbox. And now, let's see how we've used that, all this kind of information, and how we've done with that. And the advice I've gathered. I've gathered advice in 5 areas. It's about strategy, it's about structure, design, details, and test. So let's start with the strategy. Life is seamless, and it's our responsibility as designers to make sure that the experience is seamless too. Oh, thank you. That's what I was looking for. We can look into a kitchen, an ordinary kitchen, on a weekday and see how the family is using the different products in their homes. But we don't know in which order they will use the products, or if they will hand over in the same use case the task between themselves, or if they will get interrupted. That's very much the case for a modern kitchen too. This is the exhibit kitchen for the Electrolux launch 2012. And some of you will see that there's 3 ovens on the side there, and no real user will have 3 ovens. But I think I get my point across anyway. Here, we don't know how the user is moving between the hob and the oven and the dishwasher inside of this kitchen. And it's important that it's important to make sure that each of these products, the user interface for them works perfectly for the task of that product, but at the same time, that the user can recognize the interaction between the products. With that, I mean that setting delay needs to be the same, feel the same on the hob and on the dishwasher and on the oven. But lowering the temperature on the hob must be totally different from changing the program on the dishwasher. And the trick here is to figure out which ones can be similar and which one needs to be different. And I think this is very much true for the digital domain too. We don't know how the users in a use case is moving in between the different rooms there too. Now, how do you get this seamless experience working? Well, in the best of all worlds, we have a development team in one place that designs all of them at the same time, and then we get the same feeling. But that's not the case in the corporate world, or in the digital domain for that sake, often. It's one team designing one product on one timeline, another product on another timeline, etc. This is very true for the product UIs as well. And here, the result becomes a very scattered and distributed experience. It becomes very apparent because there's so many products that the users can choose between. I don't know how many UIs we actually launched for the Electrolux 2012, I think around 70. And no user is having 70 products at home, but we don't know which 5 or 6 that they will have, that they will choose from out of these 70. So everything has to kind of work together. So we struggled a lot with making this happen, this seamless experience, and I think we came quite far. What we did was to create a UX strategy for this seamless experience. And UX strategy, I think, is kind of an overused word. It's a buzzword. But think about it. It's quite a good tool to have, to be able to step out of the everyday doings and your little nitty-gritty design to zoom out and understand what you should be doing. So we did this. We worked really hard with the brand team at Electrolux because the idea was to move the brand somewhere else than where it was. And they gave us, this is what the brand should be about, the keywords for the brand. And they told us, these are the users, the target users we think are going to use this brand. So we did some trend scouting, of course, and then we went out on the field and really talked to a lot of these users to understand their everyday lives. And we took all of that material and kind of gathered it and understood kind of bottom-up approach, understanding what different experiences that could be showing, be in the end, giving the experience of that the brand team wanted. And at the same time, we also looked what was technically possible. So we merged those two things, the design we wanted to have, the experience we wanted to have, and what was technically possible. And then we created a lot of common UI parts, you know, like the font, for example, that's just one, but also ways of interacting and other more engaging parts of the UI. Then we put a roadmap together where we talked about how we wanted to introduce this new interaction design step by step, so that after a few years, all of the UIs would be the same. And it's all good to make a UX strategy, it's all good to make a roadmap, but often it just comes on paper and you don't get to do it. So I think that one of my main skills as a UX manager is to negotiate with the rest of the company. And I think it's a good thing to learn to do that, because we, as designers, in order to get it so good as we want it to be and so engaging as good as we want to be for the users, we need to be able to put monetary figures on what we want to do. And these are 4 things that I used in my negotiations. The first 2 ones are about brand and reputation, and that's all good. But it's quite difficult to draw a straight line between what you're doing and how the brand equity is going to get better or how the Net Promoter Score is going to get better. But money talks. So the two last ones is about money. In any company, also digital companies, a large portion of the service calls comes from usability problems. The user didn't understand, so she calls service to ask how to do it. And that costs a lot of money for each company. So if I can decide, if I can show how my user interfaces are easier to learn, easier to understand, then I can show that I save a lot of money for the company that they can use doing my beautiful designs. I also worked a lot with portfolio planning, looking at all of the, I told you, 170 UIs. How can we do fewer? How can we keep just a few of them, but do them much better? So taking out obsolete ones and things that has been around for a few years. My second advice, oh, sorry about that. As you hear, I have a cold. Like everybody, I think. My second advice is that we need to be sharply realistic about the importance and the frequency of use of our products. So unless, well, some of you in here are maybe doing gaming products or professional tools, then there is a high importance and high frequency of use. But the rest of us who are doing just ordinary, everyday things, we need to be realistic about how seldom our products are used. So in here, when did you last change the temperature on your fridge? Remember? Didn't think so. who has ever thought about the oven function that should be used for bread? Which oven function should be used for bread? Anybody? Ah, there's one. I think there's usually some foodie kind of nerds. And that's beautiful, but not so many of us are doing that. No, because it's the bread that matters. It's not the user interface of the oven. That's the key here. And it's so easy for us, as really passionate designers, to get into what we do every day and kind of work with the details and start to think that our user interfaces are important for the users that they're using. That's a misconception. Or, even worse misconception, that our users use it every day. I think an oven is used about once a week, mainly, if you are somebody who actually cooks. Once a half a year, if you don't, with the pizza, putting the pizza in to heat it. So what we need to do is to take a good step back, look at the data from real user observations, and really understand what one single user would actually do with our user interfaces, and how often they would do that. And then we need to design for that use case, because I think that many users will never reach further than that. They will only do that thing. And when we need to design that, we also need to design it so that it's easy. It's easy to reach that use case. For example, in this oven, which was the most expensive oven, it even had pixels and text, they took a few key clicks to actually start the oven. I don't know, 5, 6, 10 even, to start the oven. And we worked a lot to make sure that the user came as fast as possible to this screen, Start the Oven Now screen instead. So we've simplified the use cases, but it's important that we don't only simplify. We also make sure we don't stupidify. And I don't think that's a word in English, but I like it. So when any of you wants to change the temperature on your fridge, in the end, you want to have enough information to dare to do it. So that's why we now have the temperature even on the most simple fridges and most cheapest fridges. Before, there was just a scale, which was difficult to understand. There. So, my next advice is about knowing your material and working with the limitations. With the material, I mean the sandbox in the hardware UI ladder. I mean that by knowing a little bit more about this material and getting into it and asking the right questions, we can become more apt to design more engaging and beautiful and easy-to-use experiences. And I don't think you need to be able to solder or hard code to be able to design good hardware UIs. But you need to be extremely curious about how it's done. So you need to sit there with the developers who actually do the soldering or the purchasing, really important guys, or the coding, and to ask them and work with them and talk to them what they want to do. And also, in order to get what we want to do we need to make sure that all the early decisions, especially the purchasing, is done right so that it makes a good foundation for actually doing good user interfaces. So we need to ask for what we wanted very early in the development. Here, the technology was already set. So sometimes you need to work the other way around. You need to work with the technology that you have and design after that. You can't really change the technology. So I have 2 examples of that. Here is a dishwasher with text. And we wanted to use the text to describe what the dishwasher programs could do for you, because nobody really understands the different dishwasher programs. But all the text, the meaningful text that we wanted to have, was slightly larger, or a little bit more larger than the width of the screen, what would fit. So our idea was to have like this nice ticker tape text that would slowly kind of show. And we tested that with our engineers in prototypes, and with a very slow screen update frequency. I didn't tell you about this before, but it's about 2 screens per second. So we're not talking 20 here, we're talking 2. When you have that, it really, really looks bad, and you really get a really not a nice experience. So we had to rethink, and we decided to page the text chunk by chunk instead, which is not as nice and beautiful, but it's readable and elegant. Here, back to my example of the monochromatic displays and the problems with the non-anti-aliased text. So, in this UI, we did not have anti-aliased text. It was all jagged, like you see on the side there. But we have the numbers here in the middle, and what we had the idea that instead of making them as text, we made them as images. And then we cut them out like any other images, and we used them to change. So they could be beautiful, they could have the right font, and they could really be as large as we wanted them to be. So this is a way to kind of use the technology and try to do it in a different way. My fourth advice is about keeping close attention to details everywhere and all the way. And that applies for the digital domain too, doesn't it? In usability test after usability test, we saw that words always wins over icons. That's why we put little, very, very small little texts next to the icons on the buttons. And even if the text were not at par with the usability standards, but they were very small, the ease of use just increased a lot out of this. And I think this is a good idea. And I see more and more in the web and in apps that we have solutions where there's an icon, and there's space for text, but there is no text. So I think this is not a very good direction, a development for usability's sake. Now, when you have the text, yes, we have it. And is that okay then? Or no, we need to have, you can't just have any text there. You have to have the right text, and you can usability test the text as well as you usability test the icons. We asked the users here, in the same, my favorite example here, to put the oven in upper and lower heat, just normal heating. They looked around a little bit, and they found these basic settings. Yay, here it should be. Then they got to set time of the day. They should have looked here, heating functions. This is a case, and I see a lot of these cases as well, everywhere, also now when I work at Telia Sonera, where the vocabulary of the company and the vocabulary of the users totally differs. So I think the users are right, not the company. So you have the right text, you have the right icons. Now you have to have the same icons and text everywhere, all the way through all touch points. We worked hard to do that. And in this case, we managed to get the same text and icons on all the product, the manual, and everything related to that. But the main feature, the time manager in this product, has a different icon in the sales brochure. I just found that a week ago when I looked around. And that's not so good. And this is due to the fact that it's not just so many details, but it's also different people who work with it. So somehow you have to put it in a system so that everybody knows what they're going to pick the icon from. And my last piece of advice is, don't trust learnings or UI patterns. You have to test instead. When you're designing for the appliance world, you don't have that operating system that you can rely on. You cannot use well-known UI patterns. You have to invent it yourself. So you don't really know if it's intuitive. So you have to test over and over again to understand if you did it right. The second point is that the appliances are used so seldom, I talked about that, so there will be no learning at all. They will forget in between the times they look at it. So it has to be intuitive, like the first time, every time they use it. So you have to usability test and make sure that it's intuitive right away. And I think this attitude is a good attitude to have, also for the digital domain, because even if we like our UI patterns and we like our operating systems, it takes a lot of time until the UI patterns kind of trickle down into the minds of everyday users. Our users, they know what to do with this hamburger, but not with this one. So my 5 pieces of advice was, be responsible for making the experience seamless. Be realistic about the importance and frequency of use, or the low importance. Know your material and work with the limitations. Keep close attention to details everywhere and all the way. Don't trust learning or UI patterns. Test instead. So I believe that if I get to use these advice in my future days to come, I will be able to avoid making itchy UIs like the oven examples I've told you about, and instead make more transparent and even engaging UIs like the hob example I had in the beginning. So thank you.
Thank you, and time for questions. We have here a couple of microphones that we'll be sending around. So if anybody has a question from audience, please raise the hand, and somebody will bring the microphone to you. Before that, I'd like to mention that on the LiveCube, the most commented thing is actually that, at least by the eye, the question of the text winning over the icons. So how long it actually took the appliance industry to understand that?
The appliance industry, I understood it all the time, but it's just darn expensive to put the text in there. It's because you have to, for each language, you have to print a new one. So a small language like Estonian, it's not going to get there.
So actually the icons are not the question of some designers wanting to bring the brand into the dashboard, but just the localization issue. Yeah.
The icons, they're nice. They help you to recognize, to learn, of course.
Yeah, we all agree with that.
So, but the text needs to be there, and it's been a struggle how to do it. And in the end we said, screw it, it's going to cost money because we earn so much more on this.
Okay. Any questions from the audience side? The microphone is up there, so please.
Yes, thank you for your interesting talk. You talked a lot about testing. I was wondering if you could elaborate a little bit more about that, about the approach to testing hardware interfaces.
It's part of another talk. Yeah. You know, you're not able to A/B test, and you're not able to see how it's being used over time. So that's a drawback that you have. And also the other point is that the software is frozen before the hardware is done. So you can't kind of test your product on the real. You can't test your UI on the real product. You need to test it on a mock-up, usually a flash prototype or whatever. So what we did a lot was to make these prototypes, made them early on, and they're clickable, and we put them into touch screens that were large, and then we kind of made sure that they looked like they were inside of a panel, and put them on the right angle, in the right level as well. And so we asked our users to kind of push there, and so. So that's a lot of the work to kind of mimic the reality a lot. But you have to do it. You can't test this type of user interface with a mouse on a computer. But of course, you can also create Arduino boards and so, but it's not agile enough. You can't do it often enough and change it. So that's why I didn't do that.
Is microphone somewhere waiting? Then I'll ask a question from here, from Just Pickles. How much does pricing of the product limit the design?
Come again?
How much does the pricing of the product limit the design?
Oh, a lot. It's everything, I think. Because the appliance industry doesn't earn any money at all. Very, very little. The margins are extremely small, especially in a fridge. In a hob, for example, you have slightly larger margins, so you can have a little bit more money to put into that. But nobody wants a complex hob anyway, so there's no point in putting a big interface. So it matters a lot. It's really a lot of juggling with the money all the time.
Any questions from the audience? Or I'll take the next one from here. Some appliances have been around for a long time. Is this a problem in itself?
I think so. Because the user interfaces of appliances are seen as stale and not communicating and not modern to the users. And this is something we know. There's no kind of, they don't have this new way of communication. So they should be connected to the internet. And that's kind of the holy grail to understand how that's going to be done, because that costs a lot of money again. And it's not that easy to find the right use cases to make sure that the appliances becomes part of the Internet of Things. So I think that's the next step. Going ahead, you have very simple user interfaces on the appliances, and then all the more complex things, it happens on your phone. And so, but of course, you want to be able to start the oven from the oven. You don't want to do that from your phone. So you have to really figure out what part of the use case is there, and what part of the use case is here. So that's the future, I think.
Yeah, and there comes also the question of all of the features on the devices that I think we discussed yesterday during dinner, was that do we actually need to put all of the features on the control panel? Maybe it would be enough if there is just this sticker which is shown in the shop, which is telling about all of these bread cooking capabilities of the oven.
You stole my line there. Anyways, what we said was that it's terrible that you put in another button for another feature, another button for another feature. My favorite example was that earlier, ovens had a little button to fast heat. And we said, like, guys, you don't need to have that. You should write it on a sticker or on the spec sheet that it fast heats this one. But it should always fast heat. So you don't have to set that as a user. Take away the feature from the user's mind when they're actually using it. In the shop, you can have it if the salesperson wants to kind of sell up on that. So that's kind of the trick. And we managed to get very far already with this Electrolux range that I talked about. And I think that's kind of a development in the industry. However, our Asian friends, LG and Samsung, they are working a lot with features. So there's always this kind of going back and forth. You're looking at them, you want to do like them, so...
I'm kind of rephrasing one question from there, that why there are so many functions for each type of a donut. But let's ask more like this is kind of rhetorical question, I think. Yeah. Have you actually done some post-launch tests to see that how many people are actually using these functions, these special pizza regimes and everything? Because I know that my oven has tons of things, but mostly I put it into the quick heat. Yeah. Now then there is the annoying part of beeping after it finishes, so you must go and cancel the beeping. And then I'm the computer guy in home, so I be turning from heat to 200 degrees into be at 200 degrees. But my wife and kids, they usually just leave it there.
And then
the quick heat.
Then it burns.
It's a problem.
Yes.
But it's actually kind of...
what was the question again?
The question was that are the functions actually used?
No. No, as I said, some users use it a lot, and on the hob, yeah, you do use it. And sometimes you like something, you start to use something and you like it. But since they're not connected, it's very difficult to track how much something is used. So what you have to do is to go out and observe and do retrospective account and ask people when they last used something and hope that they're truthful about it. And we also, of course, when testing the products, the UIs, we put it out in people's homes for a certain amount of time, and then they answer questionnaires and so then we get a little bit of hunch. But I think that's something that also the Internet of Things will bring to this industry. People will actually see how little is being used. So when you can start to connect it, you can start to track, and that's going to be something different.
There is a question, what the companies are doing about accessibility, for example, the interaction between a visually deficient and person and the devices. Do you include that somehow?
Yeah, the Electrolux brand, the washing machines and so, they had green LEDs before, and that's not a good idea for colorblind. So we took that away. Now they're yellow, or white, depending. So that's just green, bad idea. Let's not have it. And yeah, of course, you check your accessibility. I mentioned the little text here, and they are, of course, impossible to read for somebody. We had earlier, but I think we took that away, speaking. The most expensive dishwasher were actually speaking. And that was really nice for accessibility. But I mean, they were telling what program they were on, and then you could push, and then you heard again. So I assume that everybody has those still, who needs them. But yeah, there is focus on accessibility, and that's why there are no touch buttons without sound, because you need to know when you're pushing.
Yeah, interesting. I know that several devices are getting these text labels as a sticker, so you can put next to the icon. Are there also braille stickers, so you can put the...
I don't think so, no.
Ah. Okay, so if the buttons are all the same, so then you just have to kind of remember and use your blind person skills to find them.
I think that's a problem. And the thing is, there are always a lower level product that has just your rotary and just your temperature. So there's always a good way. And usually they have good enough interaction. So, but the higher levels one with these very smooth panels and touch buttons, they are difficult.
And there is one last question. Again, the Internet of Things is here, but could not we keep some appliances out, at least have the choice to?
To what? To?
Out of the Internet of the Things.
Yes?
Could we keep the appliances out because...
Absolutely. There's no end in itself to have Internet of Things. I believe that perhaps the most expensive ones with the low-level color displays might be, instead of having the low-level color displays there, they will have a simple display and then Internet of Things. But lower down the range, when you just want to have your oven, you could just have your oven. It's not going to be connected everywhere. I don't think so.
Yeah, also from yesterday, I think Aga was telling us a story from Poland when a company was designing an oven with a touchscreen display on the door of the oven. With a long and lengthy process and a great launch campaign came a complete flop.
Yeah.
Because it turned out that people are not very keen in using the touch screens on the oven doors, which are supposed to be hot also, I think. And in case you have kids, it's a special thing. But that's not the case. They tell that most people in Poland tend to use the ovens in the lower part of the kitchen. So operating the Internet of the Things while being bent over might not be the best solution. But I don't see any pressing questions coming from the audience side. So
back to your question there, I thought that would be the case for I showed you the color screen hobs with a little color screen there. I thought that would be the case. I thought they would flop badly, but they didn't. They're just loved out there because you have the little display there, and then you can just as usual just kind of touch the sliders on the side directly, so it doesn't hinder your normal way of working. So there could be. I was surprised.
So it was kind of the interface was kind of a better user interface, and not of trying to make it into part of the World Wide Webs and everything.
No. So I was surprised, but it succeeded.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.